Welcome, everyone. I'm very excited to have you join us for our Make SCORM Work from Lost Completions to Reliable Learning Data. And what are we talking about today? Of course, SCORM, what is and why SCORM. We'll be talking about some common launching issues that people run into, taking a look at the big four of reporting for SCORM. Of course, you might be familiar with bookmarking. We'll look at that and some potential issues there. Differences with SCORM 2004 versus SCORM 1.2, and 2004 is the newer version, in case you were wondering. Cross-domain issues, how to help debugging and how you can go about that if you do run into issues, common completion issues, and then finally wrapping it up with some tips in planning. I want to go ahead and pass this off to my guests that I'm very happy to have here. Chris and Joe, why don't you tell them a little bit about Rustici, because they may or may not have heard of you, even though they might know you.
Hey, thanks, Paul. It's always a pleasure to share an audience with you, one of our favorite partners in this space. But Rustici is not a household name. You might not have heard of us, but you can find us behind the scenes almost everywhere in the e-learning industry. There's about 60 of us, mostly in Nashville, Tennessee, and we help authoring products save as these weird standards. We are the player behind the scenes in many thousands of learning applications all over the world, and we know an incredible amount about SCORM, AICC, xAPI, CMI5. We help write these standards. We participate in the community as much as we can. And put simply, we help e-learning products play nicely with one another. There are ebooks and digital resources in addition to today's recordings. There's a QR code on the screen if you want to dig into some of this topic in more of a digital offline format. So ask us anything, really, is always our attitude. And when you see us after this, please come and engage as much as possible if you care about these topics.
In case you don't know who dominKnow is, we've been around for a very similar time frame that Rustici, so for a long time. We are a leader in learning content management and authoring. We're a single platform that covers the full life cycle, really allowing you to not only create just about anything, but manage all your content and also provide dynamic delivery to make that faster and easier, and unique things like being able to reuse single source design, fully engaging capabilities in a fully responsive environment, and even helping you convert from other solutions. So if you have a lot of RISE content, and you're like, hey, I like dominKnow, but I want to not leave that behind, we can actually help you mass convert that at little to no cost for you there. So definitely check us out. We'll be sending you some more information on that.
To start out, we have a poll. Any answer is perfectly reasonable, including the what the heck is SCORM, if that happens to be the answer. But have you ever used SCORM? Ooh, 82% out the gate all the time. I love that. It is one of the most prevalent standards out there, if not the most prevalent. In the SCORM Cloud, we have a ton of SCORM 1.2 content and some SCORM 2004, but for the most part, it is mostly SCORM. So we're really excited to be talking about it with you today. Thanks all for answering. It's still pretty strong that people use SCORM all the time. A couple rarely used, a couple what the heck is SCORM, which is, once again, totally cool. These are the conversations we love to have.
Let's go ahead and move on. It looks like, yeah, most people are using it every day, or at least close. There's a few that have started to use different things there.
Turns out you all are our people. You're in the right spot. We're here to talk about SCORM all the time.
100%.
All right.
So we need to address that, at least that what the heck is SCORM person, right?
There's one. So we'll go fast. The what the heck is SCORM person, hey, we should hang out. I'll just get you up to speed. For the initiated, when folks in my personal life ask me what I do for a living, I try to explain to them something a little more relative, and maybe this is helpful for those of you guys who use it all the time. The SCORM standard is to the e-learning industry what the MP3 standard is to the music industry. And there's a lot of parallels here. If Joe, Paul, and I decide to start a band tomorrow and we go into a studio and use Pro Tools and all the knobs, or we mix a song on GarageBand on my Mac, no one looks at me at the end and says, hey, computer guy, go write the MP3 out of our music. We just hit save as in one of these tools and an MP3 comes out. And dominKnow is much like that for the e-learning industry. You can build whatever you're trying to teach somebody how to do with as much detail and assessments as you want, and you click a button and out comes a SCORM package. So from there, we have the ability to stream. We put the MP3 from our band into platforms like iTunes or Spotify, and people can listen to it on their modern device. It gives us the parallel of UL, Open Sesame. There are other tools out there that can distribute e-learning materials so you don't give up licensing, remote access, updating things from afar. All of that stuff works really well, just like you see in the music industry. And then finally, there has to be a destination for these files, and that is often a learning management system or the player on your phone, your laptop, the thumb drive in your car. All of these things play nicely with one another, regardless of what you're teaching or regardless of the music you're making, to help all of the stages of enjoying that content play nicely with one another. So SCORM itself is a package that comes out of an authoring tool, and ideally it plays everywhere. Anything with a triangle button, you hit it, it should play and track the exact same way every time. There's no advantage to a course behaving differently than the instructional designer wanted it to. They work on desktop PCs, they work on phones. It allows for a linear progression through content. It tracks time completion, pass, fail, score, bookmarking, and some other things. And more importantly, it does it every day the same way across every platform. And that type of consistency is a huge advantage, and it is the only time in tech where something's age is its strength. I know SCORM is really old, but the fact that it works everywhere all at once the same way every time means I think we'll use it next year. I think we'll use it the year after that. And I think we'll use it in 5 or 10 years. And I'm the guy trying to build the cool stuff that will come next too. So next slide.
So what are we going to talk about today? We're mainly going to be talking about what happens at runtime. And what we mean by runtime, we mean a learner has launched the course and the SCORM communication has started. And we're going to talk through what that looks like, the types of things that can happen, and some common course troubleshooting. The first thing that a course is going to do when it launches is it's going to ask the LMS for the SCORM API. One of the first failures that can happen is the SCORM course cannot find, or the LMS refuses to give the SCORM API. There's a couple of ways that this could come to pass. First off, you could have a mismatch in the course itself with respect to what standard it's asking for. Let's say you have a SCORM 1.2 course, but the LMS thinks it needs SCORM 2004 and vice versa. And so you could have some sort of a standards breakdown, and that could be on the course side of things. It could be on the LMS side of things, but there's a couple other things that could be popping up that could get in the way. 404 errors. So when you're launching, in the old days, everything pretty much launched in a new window, and everything was, for the most part, pretty good. Every so often, we'd run into a course that only searched the current window, meaning the new window, for the SCORM API. And in that scenario, it would likely fail because possibly the player has the SCORM API and it didn't bother to search behind it. In current times, we see a lot of people wanting to launch in an iframe or a frame set. And so that particular issue comes with a different kind of flavor of error, in that it's not necessarily not finding the API. In that case, the LMS just might not be giving it up because it may be coming from a different domain, spoiler, or something like that. Cross domain. So you could have a situation where you have a course that is housed in another domain, which we will touch on in a little bit. And you have the LMS in one domain, course in another domain, and those two places don't trust each other. And so you have to have a level of trust in order for that course to ask for the LMS API and the LMS to say, hey, I know you, course B. That's okay. Let's go ahead and talk. So you may run into a common cross-domain type issue where you have to set up some things ahead of time to make sure they can talk. Not all LMSs are built the same. While the SCORM standard could bring the interoperability that should come along with launching SCORM courses, sometimes the LMS may not support all of the SCORM standard. Maybe they will only support SCORM 2004 and not SCORM 1.2. Sounds strange, but it's out there. And vice versa. You might have an LMS that only supports SCORM 1.2, but you have a SCORM 2004 course. So there might be some LMS quirks out there, such as just standard support that you might run into. And that's another reason why you might receive some sort of a I can't find the API type error.
I saw several folks there are seeing different issues and some of those same issues, Joe. So I'm glad you brought them all up there. Now, how can I help mitigate this? And so dominKnow has actually done a few different things. Some other tools may be doing something similar, but dominKnow has a couple items in it built in just to try to make your life easier and so you don't have that crashed rocket. First off, we're sending communication constantly. More and more tools are doing that, but at first, tools would only send communication if something happened. Well, sometimes you lose communication, you lose that effort. So we're basically saying, hey, we're here. This is the latest. Keep talking to us. It's kind of like a chatty Cathy, and of course you can adjust that setting there. That's one of our reusable publishing profiles. So your admin or somebody can set it and everyone can take advantage of it. Another big thing is a lot of these errors result in the communication breakdown. What dominKnow has actually built in is you can actually have it automatically stop the course and say, hey, learner, something's happening. The LMS is not responding. You can customize the message so it's friendly for your organization. One of the worst cases I've seen over and over is, hey, the learner's taking it, communication stopped for whatever reason. I mean, it could be as simple as their internet went down, but they could still access the content. Maybe it all downloaded. But then they finish it, complete it, and of course the results are not recorded. And the bookmark was back on page 2 the last time it communicated. This really stops it for you there and then prevents the user from wasting their time and then at least hopefully communicating to you. But those are some things that we put in dominKnow to help address some of those common issues.
Thanks, Paul. Taking a step back, I thought it might be a good idea to talk through the must-dos and also the can-dos of SCORM communication. So at bare minimum, a SCORM course, after receiving the API, must do two things. It has to initialize communication with the LMS, so it has to pick up the phone and say hello, and it has to terminate communication, hang up the phone. Those are the only two things it must do for SCORM communication to happen. Everything else it does, what we're going to talk about on the next slide, is gravy, if you will. It can happen, but these two things have to happen in order to have good, solid SCORM communication. Now the can-dos. We often refer to the things that we see most as the big four. So completion status. Did the learner get to the end of the course? Did they get to the last slide and hit exit? Success status. If there's a quiz, did they master it? Did they get a passing score? Speaking of score, if there's an assessment, is it scored appropriately? And then time. Time is an interesting thing in that there is commonly the time that a course can set, and then there's the time that your LMS is probably tracking too. So if you're looking at your LMS reporting, you could actually conceivably have a time that is sent by the course and a time that is sent by the LMS. Now, the one that is going to be likely more appropriate for the learner's time in training will be the course one, because the course is going to know more about activity and when the learner was actually taking the training. And the LMS is usually just a learner opened the course, learner closed the course, and that was the time in between.
Joe, there was a comment in there, just to be clarified, but SCORM 2004 only, and that's off to the you passed. And that's because in SCORM 2004, it does a few unique things. It actually tells you something called success status. It will not only tell you that you've completed, but if there's a pass-fail status that because you could complete and fail, it will tell you both of those. SCORM 1.2 only has one status, the completion. Ironically, it could call it completed, it could call it passed or failed, but that's kind of confusing, and that's why SCORM 2004, a later edition, remedied that.
Yeah, they pipe all of those statuses through lesson status in SCORM 1.2 so that it's really on the LMS to figure out what to pass, because a course could conceivably, like Paul was saying, send a passed and a completed, or a failed and a completed, and then it would be on the LMS to figure that out. We had another comment about termination as well being a difficult thing. Terminate is one of the hardest things out there. We're going to talk a little bit about lost completions, spoilers, here in a little bit, and that's one of the biggest thing to happen to you'd have an issue with. And really, the exit, Dan, is one of the best parts of this. Is we're going to talk a little bit about how to get a good exit out of your course. And once you have that, then hopefully terminate should be happening. The nav requests, all those things should be happening, and everything should fall into place. But we'll talk a little bit about that here in just a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll just add, the problem with SCORM is there can be interpretation. Sometimes not all the rules are followed by everyone. So it may work in Cornerstone, but not work elsewhere. It depends on how strictly they follow the rules on some of those things.
Moving on, bookmarking. While it might seem like a no-brainer, hey, a course should bookmark, not all courses will do that by default. If you are running other content, and even really more specifically hand-rolled content, you really want to make sure that your content is bookmarking as often as it makes sense for the course. There might be a situation where there may not make sense for it to bookmark. So let's say you have a giant certification assessment, and you don't want them to go back. You have to take it in one setting. So there is a time for bookmarking and a time to not bookmark. And so what we normally will tell people to do is make sure you test your course, also testing your course, always very important, and make sure it bookmarks as you expect it to do. That might be in something like SCORM Cloud. We've seen it mentioned in the chat a few times, or it might even be in your LMS. They might have a testing area. Lastly, if you are hand-rolling your course, meaning you're not creating it without an authoring tool, you might want to pay attention to what the SCORM course is setting as the exit type. So that's CMI.exit for SCORM 2004, CMI.core.exit for 1.2. Long story short, suspend is really what you want to look for to work in tandem with your bookmark to make sure the learner gets returned back to where they left.
So with dominKnow, some of the things that we're trying to do to make that bookmarking easier is first, give the authors a choice in those reusable publishing profiles. Do you want to resume? Most of the time it's on and automatic. You don't want people to have choices. Just go back in. You can go ahead and do that. Some cases you don't. You just want them automatically to return back to the beginning, or you want to give them a choice. So you have that capability right there. Also, when it comes to assessments, an actual test, sometimes you want it to be like an open book, and then you would turn it on, and other times you don't. Hey, if you leave, we're scoring the rest of the exam. It's like you walked out on the exam. So again, giving you those choices for it. One of the other things is what is actually remembered in the bookmark. Of course, it's the page that you left off on. That's pretty common in what you would hope. In today's modern world, a lot of your learning, and in dominKnow, it could be some or all, we have both options, but it may be responsive. So those pages might actually be quite long. And so one of the other things that we've done that maybe not as common is it's also remembering the section of your page. So not only go to the page, but it'll scroll automatically to where you left off. And of course, there's other things like variables. Maybe you've been getting gold coins. You're playing an 80s game like we're doing there. It's remembering all that information. And then, of course, the assessments, if you have that set up there. So these are the things that we've built in, and we found with folks that this will really help your learner experience.
All right. And the last thing that we like to see a course do, just because it tends to be good practice, especially if you have an assessment, is interaction reporting. So what an interaction is, it's basically SCORMy for question and answer data. You can have access to interactions in both SCORM 1.2 and SCORM 2004. SCORM 1.2 has a less robust model of interactions, meaning that instead of getting full question and answer text, you're going to get an ID like we have on the slide here, Q_03 for the question text, and maybe an answer ID, A_1 for the answer ID. There are some question types that can get you more data, but for your run-of-the-mill, multiple choice, that sort of thing, you're only going to get IDs. Where SCORM 2004 really shines for a lot of people is the ability to analyze your assessments in a way that you can grab full question text. So meaning, where is the princess? Answer, she's in the next castle. you can grab meaningful reporting that not only lets you assess your assessments themselves to make sure they're doing the job, but also your learners. Are your questions hitting the learners in a way that, maybe you have one that everybody misses or one that everybody gets right? And you'd be able to go back and really modify your assessment to be a true, meaningful display of the outcomes of your assessment.
I mentioned we might sneak in xAPI there. We've been talking about assessments. There's a question in there, SCORM 1.2 or 2004, when to use it. This is actually a good reason to use 2004 because, as Joe mentioned, it gives you a lot more details for item interactions. xAPI can do other things. And in Domino, we actually enable you, if you want to do SCORM 1.2 or 2004 and xAPI at the same time. You just have to have an LRS, a learning record store, to point it to. If you do use xAPI in Domino, one of the things we've done is we tried to make xAPI actually useful. There were some comments about tools, and there's like, xAPI data this tool sends is useless. What we do is for item interactions, both test questions and practice questions, so knowledge checks in there, and pre and post test, we're sending all that data. We're including what objective it actually is associated with it. If you use that, if you have more than one test in a course, well, SCORM is only going to report one score. But in xAPI, we'll actually send the results for each module or chapter test that you had, as well as the overall. And of course, if you have pre and post test in SCORM, it's only going to send one score, whichever was the latest. But with xAPI, we can actually send more data. So we send your pre and post and label that there. And then if you want to know, hey, what browser they're using, maybe you're having a mobile issue, we're sending that types of data too. So those are just some other built-in features. You just have to use Domino and turn it on to take advantage of those things.
All right, let's jump into some actual issues that we've seen, at least in our support department, things that come up from time to time. One common scenario is you have a SCORM 2004 course. It's going to be either second or third edition. You start the course, you leave early, and instead of seeing incomplete alone, you see incomplete and failed. From an administrator standpoint, it is part of the normal default roll-up rules, but from a learner standpoint, if I'm a learner and all I know is I'm sitting down to take training and I have left early, or I haven't even touched the assessment yet, and I show up as failed, that'll likely be a support ticket, me going to talk to my manager saying, oh my gosh, I swear, Chris, I did not fail. I just didn't take it. So why does this happen? SCORM 2004, second and third edition, have a set of default roll-up rules that treat incomplete as failed if the course hasn't taken into account that it might not set a success status yet. So there are ways around this. You could possibly add some roll-up rules into your manifest in your SCORM course. Adding roll-up rules, adding sequencing and navigation can be quite difficult. Those specs are pretty wordy, and there's a lot of things you can do. And it's one of those things where if you're giving it a ton of toys and you just don't know which one to play with first, and there's a lot of things to apply there. There is an more easy button approach to it, though. In SCORM 2004 4th edition, they actually changed the default roll-up rules to roll-up unknown instead. So in the scenario we described above, instead of seeing incomplete failed, they'll see incomplete unknown, which to me would be a lot less scary, and I wouldn't have to go talk to Chris about my performance.
So some things that we do to try to help you with that particular situation in SCORM 2004 and Domino is, one, after many years, we actually just pretty much leave the roll-up in suspended. And so it remembers where you left off and everything, and this usually handles almost all cases. If for some reason it doesn't, there's a setting you can go ahead and change it there. In SCORM 2004, we do automatically send both statuses in there. And we have settings in there, like if you have 3 test attempts, well, that success status doesn't actually get sent until you actually pass it or you run out of attempts, because at that point you have no attempts and therefore you have truly failed. So try to keep that clean, very accurate with that information.
Cross-domain issues, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and this is just taking a closer look at what that communication looks like. Natively, SCORM does not support cross-domain communications. Some of y'all have probably run into this before, especially when you're launching things in iframe or a frame set. You might have a course that is launching, but is maybe trying to do something with the window, and technically that course doesn't own that window because you're within a frame within the player. In situations like that, you want to make sure that your course is actually ready to be launched in an iframe. And this really moves past cross-domain and goes straight towards any course, really. But more so when you have a domain within a domain and it's trying to do something with something it has no jurisdiction over. So once again, you'll want to test your courses, especially your cross-domain courses, just to make sure, one, the trust level's there, like we discussed earlier, and the course isn't trying to do something with a window it doesn't own.
And dominKnow, we actually have two options for you when you go to publish that content. One, you can do it the traditional way that you might be doing with any other tools out there where you download the package and upload it. But we also have a dynamic delivery option where that content, just like Joe described, lives in a different domain, but talks to your LMS as if it was all there. Potentially an issue could come up. 99% of the time, it doesn't in there, but that's why we're there to help you. And that is a critical thing, because some of those things, there's nothing that the content authoring tool can do or the LMS can do. It might be a security setting that your IT has overridden. Folks who deal with this often, like dominKnow and Rustici, kind of know what to look for. That's why we're there to help you out with that in those rare cases. So you can say, hey, security folks, could you address this little thing? And almost always it's a setting they can adjust or put in an exception for that domain.
So long story short, to kind of pull together all the things your course can do, test your courses. And that could mean SCORM Cloud. I'm also going to squirrel in the SCORM Cloud question about parser warnings when you import something into SCORM Cloud. Generally okay. You'll want to test, but chances are it's usually just bad XML, something that's illegal in that manifest file that is technically fine per the SCORM standard, but you should test it just to make sure. But you should test your course in SCORM Cloud, test your course in your LMS, make sure it does what you want before you start unveiling things on your general learner population.
One of the things in dominKnow to help you out with that testing, and no matter what great things we put in to help you out, there's always some weird thing. And in dominKnow, you have a built-in debugger. You can use a shortcut key if you want to learn about it in dominKnow. There's a link you can launch there, and then it can actually launch the debugger. And someone asks about, hey, what's all this communication that's going on that we don't see? Well, this is that communication you don't see. And so, for example, in this particular case, we're seeing a bit of information that you don't see, but it's pretty important. It's that suspend data. You know, if you want to give it a generic name, it's the bookmark. It's all the information the course needs to return to where it left off properly. And sometimes that doesn't work out properly. And you see that there's a problem with that. We'll talk about that in a moment.
Lost completions. If I were to set up a top 10 of support cases and support issues and things that Paul and I'm pretty sure over the years, Paul and I have searched each other out on the show floor when we go to expos to talk about this sort of problems when they come up. This is probably the top 3, not just the one, not in the top 3, 1, 2, and 3, lost completions. And what we mean by lost completions is your learner is logged in, you log in, your learner takes the course, they get a completion. Maybe you're lucky and they took a screenshot that said you were completed, but they've taken the course, they completed it. Maybe they exited, maybe they didn't. Regardless, they closed their laptop and went back to work. And then they either came back in to look at their courses and they're incomplete. Or maybe Chris looked at my report and said, Joe, you did not take harassment. It says you're incomplete. And then I say, well, we'll look at this screenshot. This is what we generally will call a lost completion. I saw that Ken said that he has about a 3% rate. And in some cases, that is, if you were to ask me a long time ago, I would say that might be okay. I like somewhere lower than that, just because we don't know about your learner population. 3% of 10 million learners is a lot of support tickets. And so this is where we like to take a closer look at a number of items, both on the course side and the LMS side, to really try to mitigate and limit the risk of these things happening.
So I'm curious, quick poll for the audience. What are your lost completion rates like? Around 1 to 2% seems to be about half of you guys. Greater than that would certainly be the majority. And I think Joe would say that if you are experiencing a lost completion rate in your LMS above 1%, there are things you can do to stop it. If you are digging through this problem and you're saying, wow, I wonder how I stack up against everyone else, if your loss completion rate is 1% or higher, we should work on that problem together.
Agreed. That's the sweet spot. Once again, back in the day, if I would have that conversation, I'd say, 1%, I have a trophy for you, maybe even a t-shirt, but it's not like that anymore. There are more people taking training, which means there are more opportunities for those types of front things to come up. All right. So there are a lot of opportunities for things to go sideways at runtime. Chris talked about one of them, that sometimes the problem exists between the keyboard and the chair. And that's just because a learner, as much as we'd love to say that all of the learners who are taking training are going to do it exactly as we want them to do, they're going to take their training on a good internet connection. They're going to answer all the questions. They're going to touch all of the interactions, and they're going to hit that exit button that's up in the top right. But that doesn't always happen. So it's good to take a look at your course and some other items to identify things that could get in the way. First off, exit. Is the exit of the course is almost always one of the most common problems of this types of behavior. And so what we usually ask our course providers and authors is to do a couple of things. One, an exit button, just because exit buttons really gives the course an opportunity to, one, signal to the LMS, hey, I'm done. It gives the course an opportunity to put all of its books back on the shelf, if you will. It's going to stop, unload, and do all the things you expect. It's going to terminate, likely. And it is going to, most importantly, concede control back to the LMS. So this way, everybody knows what it's doing. The course knows it's closed. The LMS knows it's unloaded, and it has all of that runtime data. And so that is really the number one thing that I always advise people on, especially when they're launching in a frame set. You really don't want people closing both the player and the course at the same time when they launch in that frame set. Two, good communication with your learners. So as a learner, sometimes I just want to get through my training and get back to work. And so maybe you don't have my total attention. And so making sure that you have a learner has that idea of a path and what means success in this course. I have to click on all the slides. I have to interact with everything that's in the course. I have to get an 80 on the assessment, and then I must click exit. Making sure that's a clear and concise so that the learner knows exactly what to do so they can get through the course and get back to work is also super important. Back in the day, we had a lot of courses set completion on exit. Doing something while the course is on the way out is usually not a great idea, mainly because there is a chance that even in the new window, that course could be sending completion and the player's already gone. In that case, the course conceivably did what it needed to do, but the player wasn't there to enter to receive that information. Results page, I love a results page. I'm a golden retriever of a person who really likes to be patted on the head for things. And so a results page does a couple things. For a learner like me who wants to know that I did a good job, I get the pat on my head that says, hey, Joe, you got a 90 on your lockout tagout course. Great job. But then also in the plumbing, in the back end, you could be setting completion and doing things you want to do before exit. And then lastly, I always like to bring up exit type as well, just because some LMSs will, or pardon, some courses will set normal when you've completed a course, which is perfectly reasonable. But if for some reason you come up with a loss completion type issue and you've set normal, that means that that next launch is going to be a new attempt. It's going to start over. So all of that runtime data is going to be technically wiped out of the registration state. So suspending on completion will help for those learners that will relaunch after they get the loss completion to see if they can kind of push that completion through.
Now, as you might imagine, we've run into completion issues in the past, and we've learned from our mistakes or learned from different behaviors that folks have run into. So first off, we provide a bit of governance. The admins control, they can lock out some of these settings so people just don't have, and every one of your organization tries what they think it works. Hopefully you can all learn from that and pick the right settings in there. And of course, we want to make them reusable. So once you have the settings, you can apply it to most of your courses or certain types of courses. And if you update it, it updates everywhere. Again, trying to make that easy. And there's also multiple settings because as the farmer's commercial says, we've seen a few things over the years, We have that launch. Sometimes you want it to launch in a new window because the frame set type approach is not working. Or you don't want it to launch a new window because people are closing the other window behind it. Sometimes in mobile devices, it works differently than it does on desktop. So we actually have 2 on-off settings for both desktop or mobile to force it to open in a new window if you want or not. Another item is that exit behavior. The defaults that we set up usually work, but sometimes people talk about, hey, closing windows issues. And sometimes in your LMS, if you close the wrong window, things don't properly roll up or close all that. And so we have several different settings for those different unique iframe or frame settings in there to automatically close the top, automatically close the parent. Most of the time you don't need those, but again, different situations, different LMSs, different behaviors, maybe mobile devices, you might want to override and choose one of those settings. And of course, some folks have asked about this. We mentioned this before, how often we said, hey, more is better most of the time communicating, but sometimes LMSs are on underpowered servers and things, so you can adjust that commitment level and reduce how many times we're saying, hey, we're here. Here's the update. We don't want you to lose anything. One other thing, too, that I talk about is that completion status. The LMS tries to interpret SCORM 1.2, and it may not. Sometimes some of the LMSs, they don't work unless you send pass or failed. Or if you send pass or failed, it doesn't work unless you send complete. The default usually works, but again, we provided those settings so you can override that completion status to match whatever your LMS's unique needs are for that. And then there's a couple other, again, esoteric but very important. Maybe your LMS Saba, some folks throw out there. One of the things I used to remember is that really adhere to that mastery score. Sometimes that mastery score wasn't matching what you wanted as the passing score. So you can override that. You can go ahead and adjust the manifest. Or maybe you're launching content in Europe and they don't want you to track the actual score because it's against compliance in that particular country. That's something that you can set and override and just not send the score as the data. So these are all different things that you can adjust for your unique situation, save, and then manage at the top level.
So when these issues come up, I like to think of there's 2 paths here. You have the path of when no learners have recorded any completions. You've created this course and you've unveiled it on your learners and no one's completed it. 98% of the time, that's going to be a problem on the course side of things that would need to be changed. But even if the situation is an LMS like Paul was talking about that only accepts the past, but you said completed, that sort of thing, you still need to change something in the course because, as most of you probably know, it's probably going to be much easier to change something in a course than to have an LMS change its behavior. In that sort of situation, I would launch an testing tool, check debug logs. We test content with folks pretty much every day, and they share debugs with us. We walk through the course with them and point out the things that we would normally say, okay, that could be a problem. And so that is usually a good thing to do. The browser console to check for things like access is denied for cross-domain type problems. Every so often you'll see those in the browser console or maybe even in the network tab of the console. And then lastly, hopefully your LMS has some sort of logging that you can see transaction level data to see what the course is saying and what the LMS is saying in return, if it's saying anything. Where things get a little hairier is that other path. And that's where some people have reported a completion, but there are others who have not. This is where the problem is usually generally exit related, maybe learner behavior related, because that's really the one thing we can't control. We can do all of these things and fix our courses and make sure our LMS is up to date and all that stuff. But there's that one kind of wily issue that we cannot control, and that's what a learner is going to do at runtime. When no one has a completion, and these are very kind of vanilla examples of debug logs that we pulled from cloud, these are the types of things that we might see. This is an interesting example in that we can see the course is setting a score in that blue text, which is the runtime. We can see that there is no status being set, which is probably going to be a problem, but it is calling terminate correctly. So it's doing some stuff correctly and other things not so correctly. You could also potentially see a situation where the course is setting a status, but not terminating. So there's a lot of different ways that things can go sideways. This is just a way that we captured just so we can show this out to you. And then the next one is going to be what it could look like if you did get a completion. In this scenario, you can see the score in there. You can see the status was set, both completion and success. There is an ADL nav request in there, which is a SCORM 2004 item that is needed to roll up completion. That's likely for another webinar. And lastly, we do see the terminate. So your debug could look a little different and still be successful. But in this one, this is just a nice kind of vanilla, this should have worked situation. So some things to look for when people have survived the boss battle. They have gotten their completion, but others haven't. So roll-up issues. SCORM 1.2, the roll-up is actually taken care of by the LMS. So in that scenario, you likely aren't going to see, hopefully, a ton of SCORM 1.2 issues. SCORM 2004, on the other hand, does require a good, clean, what we'll call a good, clean exit to roll up that completion. In that scenario, you'll want to make sure that people are exiting in a way that the course expects. If you're launching in an iframe, which we had a question about frame sets, well, in that scenario, we mean it's launching in the same window as the player or an iframe. You'll want to make sure that X button is there so it can see control back to the LMS and actually return back to from whence it came. Very important in mobile launches. I saw a lot of people in chat with mobile problems. That exit part is usually the problem. In this day and age, I've got my telephone right here. My youngest was in college and I saw her take lots of courses on her phone, and you have a MacBook right there. But people do it. You might be on the bus taking training, you might be doing anything. But the thing to remember is putting it to sleep and putting it down is not exiting the course. So if you have SCORM 2004 courses, that could be a problem. And so once again, making sure you have clear instructions and they hit that exit button in mobile, super important. And then lastly, if you run into a large percentage of this, which I would say above 2 or 3%, then you might want to contact your LMS and talk about what they can do on their side, what you can do to work together to get past these types of issues, specifically by looking at LMS logging and anything they have on their side.
There's a question about, hey, what is a trigger for exit button? It depends on the app or which course is what it's doing there. But typically that is closing the window. It's sending the, hey, I'm done, the termination of the communication, how it's handling the roll up, suspending it. And so it should be handling all those things. Some of the things that we've done in dominKnow is we realized no matter what you do, people want to go out their own way, even though the exit's over there. Some things that we've done is your end pages, we treat them as master pages, and they're reusable. So again, as an organization, you can create something you think it works, apply it to all those things, and then later on, if you're finding out, hey, people are not interpreting this correctly, you can adjust it for everywhere. Second, we try to make the effect of no matter how big I make that exit sign, they're going to exit how they want to. They're going to close that window. Can't handle if they don't exit, like Joe had talked about with that mobile device there. But so we've set it up so it doesn't matter how you close that window or the exit button or the X, or those are the main ways. Right click and close, but it will actually do the roll up and everything automatically with that. And again, it's rolling up those settings, setting it automatically every time. So even if you don't exit, it should at least be bookmarked to the last page. And then when you come on and go ahead and relaunch, you're at the last page or the previous page, you can go ahead and exit properly with that. If you really have a situation where you're losing that connectivity for any type of reason, some people talked about how their LMS times out because of security reasons. Sometimes the course will keep running because that's not really counted in that way. And the LMS can't tell the course to go ahead and close on that. And so again, we have that warning that says, hey, I've lost communications. The LMS no longer talking to me. I don't know why, but it will go ahead and stop people from running into that situation. We actually had a very large consulting firm, they're worldwide, and they had a situation where they had restricted what browser, no mobile devices, because they really needed to keep all the support tickets down below 10%, which is much higher. This was a little bit further back when the browsers were quite a bit different, even the mobile devices. But they were going out to 300,000 different folks. Well, they switched to Domino One and basically said, you can use any browser, any mobile device. And their incident rate was actually below 5%, probably closer to 2.5% with that. It's because of all these things I mentioned and basically stopgaps and different settings in there to prevent the problems from happening in the first place and account for, again, odd learner behavior that you don't really know until you've been around for a while and experienced all these different things.
So tying it all together, we touched on a lot of different things, and there's a lot to go over. And so just to kind of tie together what we talked about, an exit button, super important. If you have access to use one, we always recommend doing it. Results pages are always great to use. Clear instructions for your learners, make sure they know how to get through your courses. If you're in a mobile device, while launching an iframe can be important, mainly because I know some Android devices will actually close the player behind that maybe has been laying dormant because it's the player window and the course is doing all the work. And if that player closes, then you're going to probably run into problems that you might run into that. So if you put it in a frame set, then those two things are always talking. And then lastly, and Paul kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, keeping things updated on your LMS side, if you can do that, is super important. We've all been doing this a long time. And the things that I know now versus the things that I knew back in 2005, very different. And the same thing with, our player. Things have changed. There have been performance upgrades. We've found countless bugs that we didn't expect to even see, and they've all been fixed. So keeping your player up to date, your LMS up to date with the latest version, with all of the latest fixes, chances are your LMS has lost completions on their mind. I can almost guarantee it because it is a problem we all have experienced if you're using SCORM at some point. So having that line of communication with them is pretty important, especially when it comes to upgrades.
Well, hey, Joe, there was one other question in there, and I'll answer a little bit myself, but add in was, would there be any benefit to telling learners like a top 10 of what not to do so they can reduce errors on their part? And honestly, I think you don't necessarily have to tell them what not to do, except maybe, again, we've done, and Domino and other folks have done similar types of things trying to prevent, hey, if they don't hit the exit button, but maybe for best success, make sure you click on the exit. So you provide that information in the beginning. And then another tip that I've seen often is don't close other windows. Sometimes people, hey, I don't like a messy desktop or whatever. So they have their course launched, they close other windows. And one of those windows may be the communication window between the course and the LMS. Now, in Domino, if you have the stop there, they'll immediately get a message saying, hey, I've lost communication. But in most other tools, you're not going to get that message. And so they may potentially continue on. Maybe for a few pages, they could keep going and then they don't get any more. But in other cases, they may be able to even complete the course. And of course, nothing was recorded past the time they close that window.
For that note, Dan mentioned at the end here about putting in the frame set is not guaranteed to make SCORM work on mobile because they handle browser lifecycle differently to desktop, which is very true. And that's where that exit button, we found if exit button in a course, it helps that, well, one, the course shouldn't be closing the window. It should be conceding control back to the LMS. So that should help matters. But mobile devices and mobile browsers can be wily and hard to control because they do close differently and they do handle things differently. That's always one of those things. It's really a case that we're always kind of hoping to make better, is how to make responsive courses behave better in responsive players.
See, we got another question. Could an LMS API call limit prevent proper completion of the LMS? Usually the LMSs they have API limits, but they're limits about their API, even though SCORM is kind of like an API. It's not truly what you would consider a modern API, and that's usually not tied to it. So that's probably not a problem if your LMS has API call limits. But like I mentioned before, in terms of communication, it could not be handling the communication and just dumping some because of like, hey, you're talking too much. I'm ignoring the next 10 statements. Oh, now I can hear. So that could be it, but it's usually not a limit unless, Joe or Chris, you've seen any cases where an LMS had a limit that you could actually set as opposed to the server just running out of capabilities?
I have not seen that. I wouldn't expect that just because of, maybe I could, like you were saying, your actual RESTful API that goes with your player. I can see you getting too chatty and the player saying, no moss, but the actual SCORM runtime and the API calls being made then, I have not seen that. Just because that's one of those things that we haven't seen it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And so it's a good thing to kind of have in our knowledge base.
There's another question. Hey, is this a presentation of SCORM package? It actually is not, but it could certainly be. dominKnow, like other tools, you can take a PowerPoint, import it, and adjust it in. Although if you're thinking about trying to track data and use things for presentation instructor-led materials, I recommend xAPI standard out there because it's a lot more flexible. You could just run it as a web link, be tracking things, see who's accessing it, doing different types of information from that. So, well, hey, I just want to say very much thank you to our audience, and thank you so much, Chris and Joe. It's always a pleasure to have and join you, whether it's in the hallway at a conference or on a presentation.
Agreed.
Yeah,
We
thanks, Paul. We
appreciate it.
really appreciate you sharing this group of folks with us. They're clearly our people. Joe and I have a real ask us anything really attitude towards this. So if this was interesting, great. Come hang out with us more frequently. But if you have specific questions we might be able to help answer about standards or anything else, hey, there's some email addresses on here. Joe and I are easy to get a hold of. We look forward to talking to you.
Take care and
Yeah.
have a wonderful rest of the day, and hopefully you're off to a great weekend soon.
Thanks, everybody.